All right, so for lesson 3 today, which is 7-12, we are going to be comparing decimals that are greater than 1, which is actually sometimes easier than comparing decimals that are less than 1, so that'll be good. I would like you to make sure you've got your SAB out and a pencil, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This first section does a really good job of explaining something that we've been sort of briefly talking about. So we're going to look first at these sort of tables to the right. So this says, what happens if we insert a 0 to the right of a whole number? So look right here at this section right here. This is what they're talking about. If I were to insert a 0 to the right of this number, what's going to happen? What happens if I add a 0 to the end of 3 or a 0 to the end of 67? Well, it ends up getting bigger. I'm going to end up changing my number. And so here's what I would like you to write down there for number 1. I end up changing my number. And what happens to it? It makes it 10 times bigger. Okay? And that works for any number. If I had a 5 and then I add a 0 to the end, it's 10 times bigger. If I had 100 and I added a 0 to the end, it's now 10 times bigger. If I had 379 and I added a 0 to the end, it's now 3,790, or still just 10 times bigger. So that changes my value. But look at this one. This says, what happens if we insert a 0 to the right of a decimal number? Well, if I had 0.3, if I had 0.3 and 6.7, if I add this little 0 onto the back, have I changed my number at all? No, this is still 3/10, this is still 7/10. This 0 means nothing. So I did not change the value. Okay? That's important there. Doesn't change the value at all. Well, let's look at number 3. It says, what happens if we insert a 0 to the left of a whole number? So if I had something like 3 and 67, and I ended up putting a 0 to the left of it, well, other than the fact that it looks really weird, have I done anything to the problem? No. This is still 3. This is still 67. It did not change my number. But I have to go to the next page, but you should have this information still on the same. So it says, what happens if we insert a 0 to the left of a decimal number, but just after the decimal point? So here's what they mean by that. If I had 0.3 and I had 6.7, and they want me to add a 0 between here to make this 0.03, and to make this 6.07, well, have I changed my number? And the answer is yes. I absolutely changed the value of that number. For example, in this one right here, I actually just made my number 10 times smaller than the other one. Okay? So, number 5 basically says, are whole numbers and decimal numbers alike or different when it comes to putting in extra zeros? And they're different. It totally just depends on the scenario, right? In one of those whole number scenarios, it did nothing to change the problem. And in one of those decimal number scenarios, it did nothing to change the problem. But in one of those whole number scenarios, it did change the problem, and also in one of those decimal number scenarios, it also changed the problem. So we definitely can mess things up if we're not too careful with place value, but that's not always the truth. So let's look at one like number 6. It says, do the pairs of numbers below have the same value? And then it wants you to tell me why or, why or why not. So this is 0.6 and 0.6. Well, did it matter if we added a 0 to the left of that decimal point? No. So these are totally the same. Yes, they have the same value. Same with 0.25 and 0.25. This still means that there is nothing in the ones place. So yes, these are the same. And then over here for 0.9 and 0.90. Well, this is still 9/10, and this is 9/10 or 90/100. You can read it either way. So yes, it is also the same. Okay, and in this case, these zeros didn't change the value. If you'll write that for me. Zeros didn't change the value. Okay. So on to our next page, it says you can use your understanding of place value and the placement of zeros and decimal numbers to compare decimal numbers. So here's the example that they gave you. It says which of these numbers is the greatest, and you've got 2.35, you've got 2.3, and you've got 2.4. So those are your 3 different numbers. But here's what they're telling you. You can do something with a 0 there to help you compare these where you're not going to change your number. Here's what I mean by that. If I were to add a 0 to the back of this and a 0 to the back of that, have I changed my number at all? No. This is still 3/10 or 30 hundredths in this case, and this is still 4/10 or 40 hundredths in this case. So now when I stack them all, and I can add that 0 there to help me sort of see a little bit better. It is super easy to compare these numbers and write them from least to, or it says which one of these is the greatest. Well, here I have a 2 in the ones place. Those are all the same. But then here I can see I have a difference. Here I have a 3 in the 10th place, a 3 in the 10th place, and then a 4 in the 10th place. So I can already tell that this one's greater. But another way I could have looked at this, I had 35, 30, and 40 is definitely bigger than both 35 and 30. Okay? So let's look at 7 through 14. I'm going to do all of these with you. 27.5 is being compared to 8.37. Well, here's what I want you to notice here. 27.5 and 8.37. Well, you're trying to compare something that's a whole number. So think about money. Would you rather have $27.50 or $8.37? This has a 2 in the 10th place, whereas this has nothing in the 10th place. So the 2 is going to be greater. So here's the way that I like to compare these. This would be my advice that I give to you guys. Underline your ones that have same place values, so that way it makes it easier to compare. Here, this has a 6 in the ones place, and this has a 5 in the ones place, so I don't even need to look at the rest of that number. I know that 6 is greater than 5. Now on one like number 9, I see a 7 in the ones place, and then I also see a 7 in the ones place. So the ones place is not going to help me answer this problem. I need to look next door at my 10ths place. Well, I see a 3 in the 10th place, shoot, and then another 3 in the 10th place. So I need to try again. Let's look at the hundredths place. And here I have a 6 in the hundredths place and an 8 in the hundredths place. So I know that that's going to be bigger. All right, same deal. We're going to start from the left. Let's do a compare tens place and tens place. Those are both 3s, so that's not going to help me out. What about a 6 in the ones place and then a 7 in the 10th place? Or sorry, in the ones place. I'm getting mixed up. So which is larger, a 6 or a 7 in the ones place? 7 is larger, so it's going to go to the right. Now you can see how you would have gotten yourself in trouble if you had started from the right. If I had compared those hundredths places first, which is larger, an 8 or a 9 would have been larger, but that's not true for the whole problem. So you have to start with your largest digit. Okay, for number 11, I have nothing in the ones place for each of those problems, but I do have a 5 in the 10th place here and a 2 in the 10th place here, so I know that that 5 is going to be larger. For number 12, oh, this one's definitely trying to trick you a little bit. I have a 0 to show me the ones place, nothing in the ones place. And then here I have a 9 and a 9, but I have to be careful because this is actually technically a 0 in the 10th place, and this one is a 9 in the 10th place. So that means my 9 there is going to be larger. For number 13, I have a 0 in both ones place, so those are the same. I have an 8 in both tenths places, so that's the same. And then on this one I have a 0 in the hundredths place, and I know that I'm not going to change a number if I add a 0 to the end of this. So now I can see that those both would have been 0s as well, which means that they are equal. And then for number 14, I've got a 42 and a 6. However, this 4 is in the 10th place, and so is this 6. So even though 42 looks like it's bigger than 6, this is technically 42 and 60 is definitely greater than 42. So let's look at just a couple more problems, and then we'll be done for this lesson for today. It wants you to use this table to answer problems 15 and 16. So we've got some insects here, a ladybug through a bumblebee, and it tells us how long they all are. So it says, Francis measured some common insects. The table shows the lengths in centimeters, and it wants you to list them from the longest to the shortest. Well, longest means I want to have the the biggest distance. So I need to look at these numbers, and they're already pretty well stacked, which is very helpful. Whoops, I didn't mean to write over the top of that. And so that's going to help me see which bug is my biggest. So here I have a 0 in the ones place, a 0, a 0, a 1, and then a 2. Well, 2 is definitely bigger than 0 and 1. So that means that that bumblebee is going to for sure be my biggest and my longest, insect. And because I don't want to get screwed up, I'm actually going to cross off the bee because I am done with it. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I'm going to cross off that bee. It's out of the way now. All right, so then I need to know which one comes next. And again, I have the ladybug, the moth, the mosquito, and the cricket. And I see here that this was 0 in the ones place, 0 in the ones place, 0 in the ones place, and then a cricket had a 1. So, oh, geez, that's really funny. Oh, that was great. Okay, so that is going to be cricket as the next number. And now I'm going to cross off the cricket. That'll be easier. All right. Now, for the next one, I have zeros in all of my ones placed. So next I need to look at my tenths place, which is right here. And I've got a 6, and then a 3, and then a 3. Well, which one's the biggest? That would be the 6, which would make this the ladybug. And now I can cross off that ladybug. And then it says I have a moth and a mosquito. Well, there's a 3 in the tenths place for both of those. So I need to go to the hundredths place, right? But this 3 doesn't have anything after it. So what does anything after that is just going to be a 0, because remember that doesn't change the number of it. And so now I can compare 32 and 30. Well, 32 is longer than 30, so then that means that my mosquito is coming next, and that the shortest insect of all was the moth. Okay. So this last number 16 problem is just asking you to help explain what's going on. So it says Maya read about a stick insect that is 1.16 centimeters long. She compared the length with the lengths in the table. Maya says the mosquito is longer than the stick insect because 0.32 is greater than 0.16. Is Maya's reasoning correct? Well, what has Maya forgotten here? Maya forgot that 1 in her ones place. So because she had that 1 in her ones place, then that means 1.16 is going to be greater. So I don't need you to write all of that down. You could just simply write down something like that to show us that there was a 1 in the ones place here and a 0 in the ones place there. So that would be your correct answer. So let's talk about showing your work today. You just did all of those SAB pages with me, so that one's not an option, but you could do the homework and remembering journal, or you could try out your IXL. Now, before I let you go today, I also want to tell you, you have a test coming up next week, so tomorrow's lesson is a review. Now, because of that, you always want to do your review work before you watch the video, because the video is just going to be me going over the answers. So, when you're done with today, that's awesome, put your math book away, but tomorrow when you go to start math, remember to do those review pages first before you then watch the video to check your answers, okay? Log into Zoom if you need any help. Good luck!